everybody. Jim Davis. I'm Principal Analyst with Insider Intelligence, and we're here today to talk about some of the challenges around 5G and network densification. There's a lot of different issues to talk about. We can start with things around construction, of course, but there's many other legal and permitting issues, and we have a number of experts on hand today to discuss these issues with us. And I wanted to start with our first question, which would be, what are some of the major challenges that you see with engineering for small cell nodes? And I will ask the question first to Joshua Broder of Tilson.
Thanks, Jim. So when we think about engineering, we think about the difficulty of getting engineering, construction, and jurisdictional approvals done in a cohesive way. And the success in that process starts with engineering. We find that getting the pole and the fiber and the power to the same place to support dense 5G is really difficult because they tend to follow separate development tracks. So the first challenge for us is that oftentimes the engineering, the construction, and the jurisdictional approval process from a carrier perspective is actually carved up between departments at that carrier. And so those different departments are then hiring different vendors to go do that work. And so the outgrowth of that is we wind up with a pole on one side of the street and the fiber on the other side of the street. And the power is late because the site acquisition guy thought that the 277 volt daisy chained street light power could be used, but they actually need to overbuild that with a higher capacity feed and voltage transformers like the power company's trailing. And so that results in so-called stranded nodes that are not connected to fiber and power. And the second challenge that we find is that the cities have several departments facing the project. So they issue different permits for each of those activities I've described, and that further increases the changes to the project that accelerate the problems with the division between those different parts of the carrier. So you have this like three-headed beast and this three-headed beast kind of doing this, which drives a really complicated project. And so recently in the Southeast for us, we wound up with a fiber run and a node. We were responsible for the node. Someone else was responsible for the fiber on the wrong side of the street, except the problem was the street was really an intersection that had something like 11 lanes in concrete, a complicated intersection. And so it cost like $250,000 of hardscape excavation to get across those 11 lanes where we encountered 28 inches of buried concrete with trolley iron embedded in it. And many people that are working in this industry sort of nodding their head along that this situation with the fiber and the pole on the opposite sides of the street are more common than not. So unfortunately, this situation is more the rule than the exception. And there's two places where we can avoid this happening. One is when a customer says, look, just build it, own it, and lease it back to us, and we're not going to get involved in the development project. So we love to do that, but that's the exception rather than the rule. The other times where this works well is in those rare instances where the company deploying the fiber and the node is doing it at the same time under the same banner. And we were recently hired to deploy a big network in a metro area by a carrier where we were able to do both the fiber and the small cells at the same time. So as we dug into the project, we were able to sync up on the inconsistencies between the fiber and the small cell locations, priorities of work, and their schedules, right? Those things are often going like this, and approach the municipality with like a comprehensive plan where we could say, this is how we're going to permit it and remediate it all in sort of one cohesive project. And so for us, we would say like being able to deploy a single network and have a single message for the municipality gave us the opportunity to move from sort of producing units, which is how people think about this stuff, a unit of fiber, a unit of small cell, into more deploying a functional network to put 5G on air and on budget.
Well, among the construction challenges, it sounds like knowing where assets are and utility assets are is also very relevant. So Nathan Newsom of GPRS, maybe you can answer that question as well.
Yeah, so this really comes into play both on engineering side and construction. So the challenges kind of that we have been seeing in our area is people are going through this site act, they're going through the permitting, they're going through the engineering design part of it, and they don't really know what's underground infrastructure they're going to run into. So yeah, 811s, you got to call the 811 in, right? But trying to get a design ticket through can be difficult. the 811 system's so overwhelmed with all the construction that's going on, with people that are actually putting a shovel in the ground right now. Sometimes they're missing these things, and you guys all have deadlines to hit, right? So it's slowing up the process. There's also underground infrastructure that 811's not going to pick up. Josh, you mentioned trolley lines, something like that, or maybe abandoned utilities that nobody knows about anymore. They're not on the maps. Nobody's coming to mark out. Nobody's claiming those things. So they're going through this whole process, like I said, of the Permian Site Act, and they don't really know what's there. So you can imagine once you get out to your site and you start soft digging and you uncover something that was unexpected, how much time that's going to take to figure out what it is, who owns it, and then you got to go back through this whole process of moving these sites. So with that, you call a company in that does private utility locating. They can help soften this and help you guys be more successful. So what they do, first of all, you want to get the private company, but then you want to make sure they have a couple different pieces of equipment, right? GPR is a big one, also electromagnetic, duct hunter. So there's a multitude of pieces of equipment that they're going to use to make sure that they really pick up everything that's there. And then you can also get depths on utilities that are there. You can then take measurements, make sure that you have everything in line so you get your poles set correctly.
Well, so even in the best of times, there's a lot of coordination required, a lot of discovery in the process of construction. So Nathan, has anything changed dramatically in terms of COVID and its impact on construction? Are projects proceeding fairly normally in that regard, or have they been delayed? What are you seeing on the ground, so to speak?
Yeah, so I have seen some projects being pushed. I wouldn't say I've seen many canceled, but I have seen a lot put on hold. They're still pushing through though. We're still cranking through these sites. Us personally, with the private utility locating side, still pushing through, and we're still having good response time and getting out there and getting things located in a timely manner. But in general, yes, we have seen some things put on hold. I'm guessing that 2021 is probably going to be pretty hectic as it all comes back.
I've noticed that most of the challenges we've encountered from a constructability standpoint early in the pandemic are starting to clear out. So permitting offices that weren't able to operate remotely or paperlessly have sort of figured that stuff out. The big unexpected challenge we had was parking. So it used to be that we go replace a light pole and put in one of our light poles that's a cell site, and that activity is at the curb. And so for Nathan to come in and do his work, and for us to come in and do our work after him, there needs to be no parking on that little section of the road. And you've probably walked by some of these emergency no parking signs, that municipalities put up for little projects. Well, nobody was enforcing no parking. So you could get that special no parking permit, but nobody was enforcing it during the early phases of COVID. They gave everybody a buy on parking. So we had hundreds of nodes around the country push out because we couldn't get to the curb safely without working over somebody's Mercedes, which we didn't really want to do.
That's definitely an issue I wouldn't have thought of occurring at any point in time. Parking, that's again, one of those challenges that's going to come up and you kind of manage things on the fly. Well, so on to another aspect of network densification. One of the reasons that we want to do that is to enable a reliable signal for users. We need the signal to be available throughout an area. James Zick at PCTEL, you have some thoughts on how to design and build for reliable networks, and you're actually above the ground at a different level that we're talking about here. James, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, we're in test equipment. And one of my thoughts is, what is 5G really all about? With 2G, you had voice, 3G, you had voice and data. 4G was all about an IP network with applications that really just gave you information. But 5G is a new era where you have machine-to-machine communication, with robots, with medical devices, with infrastructure. And also other applications like virtual presence, where you can have a 3D hologram of somebody. And I think the coronavirus really showed us where we need to go with 5G. And in order to achieve this, the promise of 5G is that you need to get to that 1 gigabit download, service average to everybody, number one. And you have these, these goals that the 5G, 3GPP has of low latency and enhanced mobile broadband, which we're getting to with more spectrum coming about. We had the 47 and the 39 gigahertz spectrum auction earlier this year, and the 6 gigahertz unlicensed spectrum is becoming available, and then there's the mid-band 3.8 in December, and hopefully the 3.4 mid-band in December of 2021. But in order to really achieve this mission-critical applications, you really have to have a reliable network. And when you have fiber networks, you can get to 5 nines network availability because you have control over the media, fiber, or even 6 nines with the distributed network. But when you have an air interface that you have with cellular, you're lucky to get 3 nines network availability today. And if 5G is going to fulfill its promise, it really needs to have that ultra reliability. And there are several ways of getting there that I can see. One is to have this network densification that we're talking about. So 4G was all about having towers, a mile away or whatever. 5G is about having, base stations on poles every block in order to get that high densification and the amount of bandwidth that's needed to every user. In addition to that, you really have to have, for some of these mission critical applications, is multi-operators to the same device. And I've been asking this question a lot of how you get to 5 nines network availability, and I only got one answer that someone actually had done a study on, and that is with 4G, they had 4 network operators going to the same device. And this was before the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. And with that, they were able to achieve 5 nines network availability. But as anyone can see, that it's going to be extremely expensive to be able to incorporate unless 5G comes down in cost considerably to be able to have multi-operator connections to the same device. And the other aspects that I believe you need for this ultra reliability is network optimization. You don't understand your network, you're not going to be able to optimize it. You're not going to be able to have that reliability unless you really test it and thoroughly understand it with test tools. And lastly, I think one of the other aspects that might have to come to pass is you may have to have some type of spectrum monitoring down the road. Kind of like you have with CBRS today, where they have monitoring systems along the coastlines. So you don't have, radar. It senses when you have radar coming in, and it can turn off the network. So I think these are the aspects that you really need for reliability to fulfill the promise of 5G.
Thanks for some of those insights. I appreciate that. So obviously, we have a lot of challenges in terms of construction. Once they're built, keeping them up running and giving a reliable signal is another matter. But I guess sometimes, in a way, before all of that starts, there's always a regulatory issue that has a chance to impact how we build out and operate these networks. The small FCC orders 252 and 333 have been challenged in court. To give us an update on that, we have David Bronston, who is special counsel for Phillips Lytle.
Yes, thanks, Jim. Yeah, and thank you, Alyssa, for having me. It's very timely, and just a few weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued this decision and upheld the FCC's small cell order, moratoria order, and the One Touch Make Ready order. The most important one in my mind is the small cell order, and in particular, the FCC's orders on shot clock and fees. What's interesting is that this decision just came down, and in real time, by the time we're watching this video, symposium virtually, we'll know whether the cities who basically lost on this appeal will seek what's called an en banc hearing from the entire, all the judges in the Ninth Circuit. And if they're denied that, then they can petition the Supreme Court. So the opera's not over, but this, I've been saying for many years, the regulatory wind has been at the back of our industry, and now the judicial wind is as well. And, you know, it's not a carte blanche. Let's be clear. This is what the FCC has done is given more tools, perhaps more leverage, more arrows in the quiver, if you would, to the industry in these deployment challenges with local governments. There were 50 parties in the litigation, mostly cities. Got a lot of attention. But let me just, give you just a high-level view of what the small cell order in particular did on the shot clocks and on the fees. First of all, what's a small cell? It's two elements: a tower pole or structure with an antenna that's got to be less than 50 feet above ground. The antenna's got to be less than 3 cubic feet, and the antenna equipment's got to be less than 28 cubic feet. Now, what the order did on the shot clock is give cities 60 days for an attachment to be attached to an existing structure, and 90 days for an attachment to be attached to a new structure. And that's in addition to the existing shot clocks on 90 days for co-location for a macro site and 150 days for construction of a new macro site. So again, these aren't deemed approved, but it does give you, a timeline to hold over a city when you've made your applications. On the fees, I'll be brief. There are not caps, but what's called the safe harbor ceiling, and cities are not supposed to charge more than $500 for an application with up to 5 small cell antennas, $1,000 for an application for a new pole, and most importantly, as a recurring fee, no more than $270 annually fee per small cell in the right of way. So those are really the highlights, and happy to drill down on any of that. But I just wanted to give you an overview of where we are in the litigation and what the litigation, and what the rules and orders accomplished.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that overview. So
let me say just one thing. It'll be interesting to hear from Josh, either now or in a few months, what the real world implications or effects of these orders are. Have you seen anything, Josh,
Yeah, David, we've started to see a subtle shift, although, we're excited to be on the other side of the first few, litigations against this case. Now that it's supposedly settled, we've heard from, I don't know, we probably have 1,000, 1,500 nodes in some kind of a municipal snarl at any given moment. And we've heard on several hundred of those nodes since this ruling has happened that we're ready to just have a conversation about aesthetics. And so generally our orientation is to work with communities and not litigate. And so I think we're actually on the leading edge of that conversation where we've already said, like, look, when you guys are ready to do this, you want to talk aesthetics, like, let's get into that. So we're not on the litigation side of that spectrum. So we're already having those early conversations about like being deferential to municipal preferences on aesthetics. And that tone has changed. So like, yeah, we'll do it, but you're going to have to do it to our standards. And we're like, fine, just tell us what they are. And if you want some ideas, here's like a catalog of, 7 beautiful colors you could choose from.
Right. And that's interesting, because the one area that the court said, the FCC sort of overstepped itself was in trying to give guidance on aesthetics. So the aesthetics issue is still very wide open and has to be revisited by the FCC.
I guess if there's any agency I'd rather not have involved in aesthetics, FCC is certainly one of them. I didn't know if Nathan, you had any thoughts on legal issues or not.
Yeah, so I think what's going on here is pretty good overall. Setting up some guidelines for the state and municipalities to follow. But kind of like Josh mentioned, I think it's kind of like a partnership with these guys too. You want to listen to what they have to say. when they know that they're being heard and that you're willing to work with them, I think that's when the doors open to make this thing a lot quicker and work together seamlessly. So they want to be heard. You got to kind of listen to them, even if it falls outside a little bit and kind of crazy sometimes. But you work with them and they'll work with you. You don't work with them, then they're going to make it more difficult.
So James, you're not directly involved, I think, in looking at the legal issues, but if we get to a matter of a community considering the aesthetics of deployments versus, how often are they thinking of the reliability of the service when taking the environment into consideration? I don't know if you had some thoughts to add there, James.
Yeah, I don't think that enters into the picture very often. It's more about the aesthetics and getting, at least trying to get a signal to someone, but how reliable it is and how well it works is often a secondary consideration when it comes to a lot of these jurisdictions.
Yeah. Well, as a real world example, I've got an issue with a locality where they have a dispute existing over a macro site, and they are leveraging that to hold up the approval of small cells in the rights of way and nodes. And this shot clock is going to help me in trying to decouple those two issues, and because it's not right to hold up hostage one for the other. So there are going to be real world implications of this. But again, I think and Nathan's right. We got to these are meant to foster and help facilitate negotiations forward, and you're going to hopefully get to an agreement more readily.
We find that in the communities that are resistant to the structures, if they're trying to stop a tower, they're trying to drive the carriers into small cells, and if they're trying to stop small cells, they're trying to drive a carrier into a tower. And I think some of the work belongs to us as network implementers, where we have to help educate what the tower does, which provides broad coverage in some capacity, and small cell understory really providing the kind of data rates that people expect now even in the home environment. And so we recently had a difficult project with a state DOT, and when the conversation changed from being about fixed deadly objects to fixed wireless to the home, it really did change the tone and tenor of the conversation as we were trying to have a pandemic relevant discussion about, hey, look, like the minute we turn this thing on, people with their hotspots will be able to have broadband in this area that they don't have it. And it is true now, certainly with 5G, but increasingly with some of the denser 4G deployments, these are competitive with some wireline services, and certainly for people who are isolated from remote work and not being able to attend education remotely and do telehealth, that's a vital lifeline right now. And so that has been a subtle tone change with some of the jurisdictions that we've talked about the value and the benefit of the service.
Yeah, I say when we go into these small cell hearings, I wish I could find the transcripts from the macro hearings before the same board where they said, "Can't you make this smaller?" But I guess that was duck season, and this is rabbit season. I don't know. So
I think Josh hit the nail on the head again here with educating. Just educating the municipalities and the people involved. A lot of times there's a lot of rumors out there that aren't true, or maybe they're unsure of change. They just don't know. So getting held up for those reasons are real as well.
I don't know, Alyssa, how are we on time? I didn't keep real close track, but we might be around the mark. Well, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We had a really good discussion today about 5G densification and some of the challenges, both legal and construction-wise, of bringing these new services to market. It sounds like, from what I've heard today, that we're managing to move forward with new services, despite all of the challenges that we're facing, of course, COVID-19 being another one of them. So I want to thank all of our participants today, and have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.